3 real babysitting horror stories that will terrify you. Story number 1. I was about 17 when I took a babysitting job for a family that had recently moved into town. They seemed nice enough. 2 parents, mid-30s, with 2 little boys, aged 5 and 7. The dad worked in finance, and the mum was some kind of consultant who traveled a lot. Their house was beautiful but old, one of those big Victorian-style homes with creaky floorboards and long hallways where the lights never quite reached the corners. It had this heavy feeling to it, like the walls were keeping secrets. But I didn't think much of it at the time. They were offering good money, and all I had to do was feed the kids, keep them entertained, and get them to bed by 9 p.m. After that, the night was mine. I could watch TV, do homework, whatever. It sounded like an easy gig. The first hour or so went fine. I made the kids some mac and cheese, we played a board game, and then I let them watch a cartoon before bedtime. But as I was putting their dishes in the sink, I noticed something weird. From the kitchen, you could see straight into the living room, and in the far corner, near the big bay window, there was this clown statue. It was huge, life-sized, almost as tall as me, and it was sitting on this old-fashioned rocking chair, its hands resting on its knees, its painted face locked in this grotesque, permanent grin. The eyes were the worst part. They were glassy and wide, staring straight ahead like it was watching the whole room. It looked old, too, like it had been around for decades, the paint cracked and faded in places. I don't know why, but something about it just felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. I figured maybe it was some weird antique, a family heirloom or something. But even then, I couldn't understand why anyone would want something like that in their house, especially with 2 young kids. When I tucked the boys into bed, I asked them about it. "Hey, what's up with that clown statue downstairs?" I tried to sound casual, like I wasn't creeped out, but the younger boy, Jake, just stared at me, wide-eyed. "We don't have a clown statue," he whispered. His older brother, Max, nodded. "Yeah, we hate clowns. Mum says clowns are creepy." My stomach dropped. I forced a smile, told them it was probably nothing, and said goodnight. But as I walked back downstairs, my mind was racing. They don't have a clown statue. Then what the hell had I been looking at? I told myself, maybe the kids just didn't know about it. Maybe the parents had put it there recently and hadn't mentioned it to them yet. But deep down, I knew something was off. I sat on the couch, trying to focus on a TV show, but I couldn't stop glancing at that corner of the room, at that statue. Every time I looked, it felt like those glassy eyes were closer, like they were boring into me. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the room itself was closing in around me. I tried to shake it off, but after about an hour of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and texted the mom, trying to keep it light. "Hey, just wondering, is it cool if I move that clown statue in the living room? It's kind of freaking me out, haha." A few minutes passed. No response. I stared at my phone, the pit in my stomach growing heavier with each second. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. I opened the message, expecting a quick, casual reply. But instead, it was just one sentence. "Get the kids and get out of the house. Now we're calling the police." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I'd just read. Get the kids and get out? I didn't wait to ask questions. I jumped off the couch and ran upstairs, my footsteps pounding against the creaky old floorboards. My mind was racing, adrenaline flooding my veins. I burst into the boys' room, yanking back the covers. "We need to go," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." They were groggy, confused, but they must have seen the panic in my eyes because they didn't argue. I grabbed their hands and pulled them out of bed, dragging them down the hallway toward the stairs. That's when I heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of creaking wood, coming from the living room. The rocking chair. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest I thought it might explode. I peeked down the stairs, just enough to see into the living room. The clown statue wasn't in the corner anymore. The rocking chair was empty. My blood ran cold. I clamped a hand over Jake's mouth before he could scream and whispered, "Quiet. We're going to play a game, okay? We're going to be really, really quiet, like ninjas." I don't know how I managed to stay calm, but somehow I did. I led the boys down the hall, away from the stairs, toward the parents' bedroom. I locked the door behind us and grabbed the phone from the nightstand, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher picked up, and I whispered as quietly as I could, explaining what was happening. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. We huddled in the corner of the room, the boys clinging to me, their little bodies trembling. I strained to listen, my heart hammering in my chest. At first, there was nothing, just silence. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. I pressed the boys closer, my free hand clutching the phone so tightly it hurt. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. I held my breath, the seconds stretching into an eternity. Then I heard it. A soft, low laugh. Not a playful laugh, not a human laugh. It was a hollow, wheezing sound, like something that didn't quite understand how to mimic joy. The doorknob rattled, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the lock would hold. The laughing stopped, and then silence. Minutes passed. It felt like hours. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just sat there, frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Finally, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder, closer. The dispatcher whispered in my ear, "Officers are at the front door now. Stay where you are." A few moments later, there was pounding on the front door, followed by the sound of it being kicked in. The boys started crying, but I hushed them, still too afraid to move, until I heard a voice shout, "Police! It's safe to come out." I unlocked the door and rushed downstairs with the kids, my legs barely able to carry me. The officers searched the house from top to bottom. They didn't find anyone, but they did find something else. Hidden in the small crawl space behind the couch, they found a clown costume, tattered and stained, with patches of what looked like dried blood, and tucked inside one of the oversized shoes was a knife. The police later told us that the back door's lock had been tampered with, and whoever it was had likely been living in the house for days, maybe even weeks, sneaking out at night to watch the family while they slept. To this day, they never caught him. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. After the police showed up, after they searched the house and found that disgusting, tattered clown costume and the knife hidden in the crawl space, I figured the worst was over. The family was understandably shaken. They couldn't believe that someone had been living in their home, hiding in plain sight, watching them while they slept, while they went about their lives completely unaware. The parents were horrified that their kids had been in danger, and they moved out of that house within a week. But for me, it wasn't so easy to move on. Even after the police left, even after the adrenaline wore off, and I was back in the safety of my own home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, after I finally crawled into bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep, I kept hearing things. Little noises, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind against the window. But it was more than that. I'd hear faint tapping sounds, like fingernails against glass. But when I got up to check, nothing was there. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, residual fear from the night's events. But then things started to escalate. A few days later, I was home alone, trying to study for an upcoming exam, when I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was open. I always kept it closed, especially when I was alone, but now it was wide open. I was sure I'd shut it. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe I'd forgotten. But as I walked over to close it, I saw something on the floor just inside the doorway. A small, crumpled piece of paper. My heart skipped a beat. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and unfolded it. Written in messy, uneven handwriting were the words, "You found me once. Let's play again." I nearly dropped it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was it a prank? Was someone messing with me? But who could have gotten into my house? I called the police again, and they came to check everything out. They found no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside. They told me it was probably just a sick joke, maybe someone from school who'd heard about what happened and wanted to scare me. But I knew better. That night, I locked every door and window, checked under the bed, in the closets, everywhere. But I still couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that faint creaking sound, like a rocking chair swaying back and forth, even though there was no rocking chair in my house. A few weeks passed, and I tried to convince myself it was all over, that I was safe. But the fear never really went away. Then, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of laughter. Not loud, not even close, but soft and low, like someone was laughing just beneath their breath. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and listened. The house was silent again. I told myself I'd dreamed it. But then I noticed something else. My bedroom window was slightly open. I was sure I'd locked it. I got up, my hands shaking, and slid it shut, locking it tightly. But as I was about to pull the curtains closed, I saw something in the reflection of the glass. For a split second, I thought it was just me. But then I realized it wasn't. Standing behind me, just beyond the doorway, was a tall, shadowy figure. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but the room was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps as I grabbed my phone and called the police again. They searched the house, top to bottom, but as always, nothing. No signs of entry, no evidence anyone had been there. But I knew. I could feel it. Whoever, or whatever, it wasn't done with me. After that, I started seeing things, glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flash of white in the mirror, a shadow that didn't belong. My friends thought I was losing it. My parents tried to reassure me, telling me to take a break, to focus on school, but the fear followed me everywhere. Then, one day, I came home from class to find my bedroom door wide open again. This time, there was something sitting on my bed, a small, old-fashioned rocking horse, the kind you'd find in an antique shop. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before, but tied to the handle was another note. Miss me? That was the last straw. I packed a bag and left that night, moving in with a friend across town. I couldn't stay there anymore. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I couldn't trust what was real and what wasn't. But even after I left, the fear followed me. Strange things kept happening. My stuff would go missing and turn up in places I hadn't left it. I'd find strange notes slipped into my backpack, and I kept hearing that same low laughter in the dead of night. I tried everything. I changed my number, deleted my social media, even moved to a different city for college. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape that feeling, that presence. It's been years now, and I still can't look at a clown without feeling that cold knot of fear twist in my stomach. But the worst part? Sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear it, that faint, creaking sound, like a rocking chair swaying back and forth in an empty room. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I swear I hear it again, that hollow, wheezing laugh. It's like he's still out there, watching, waiting, for the game to start all over again. Story number 2. It was supposed to be an easy night. I was babysitting for a family in my neighborhood, people I'd known for years. They had 2 little girls, ages 6 and 9, and I'd watched them dozens of times before without a single issue. The parents were heading out for a fancy dinner, promising they'd be back by midnight, and they left me with snacks, the Wi-Fi password, and a hefty cash payment sitting on the counter as a thank you. I wasn't worried. What could go wrong? The house was in a nice, quiet neighborhood, and the girls were well behaved. We spent the evening watching Disney movies, making popcorn, and playing board games until it was their bedtime. By 9 p.m., the girls were tucked in, sound asleep in their shared bedroom upstairs, and I settled on the couch in the living room, flipping through my phone while some random TV show played in the background. Everything felt normal. Too normal. It wasn't until the house got completely silent that I realized just how uneasy that quiet made me feel. There's something about sitting in someone else's house at night, when everything is still, the lights dim, and the creaks and groans of an old house start to feel like footsteps. But I shook it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. That was until the landline rang. Now here's the thing. Nobody really uses landlines anymore. Everyone has a cell phone, and if the parents needed to reach me, they'd call my cell. The sudden loud ring of the house phone slicing through the silence made me jump. I stared at it for a second, that uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe it was the parents calling to check in, I thought. So I picked it up, trying to sound casual, like my heart wasn't already beating faster than it should have. "Hello," I said, expecting to hear the familiar voices of the girl's mom or dad. But there was nothing, just silence. And then, after a few seconds, I heard it. Breathing. Not normal breathing, not like someone who'd accidentally dialed the wrong number and was about to apologize. This was heavy, slow, raspy breathing, like someone was standing just a little too close, like they wanted me to hear them. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. "Hello?" I said again, louder this time, trying to sound braver than I felt. But there was no answer. Just that same, slow, deliberate breathing. I hung up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. It was probably just a prank call, I told myself. Kids messing around, dialing random numbers to scare people. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I tried to shake it off, focusing on my phone, but I couldn't stop glancing at the landline, half expecting it to ring again. And sure enough, about 5 minutes later, it did. The sharp, sudden ring made me jump again, and this time, a chill ran down my spine. I stared at the phone, debating whether to answer it. Maybe it really was the parents this time. Maybe the first call had just been a coincidence. I picked up the receiver, my voice a little shakier than before. "Hello?" Silence. But this time, it didn't last long. The breathing started again, slower this time, heavier. It sounded closer, like whoever was on the other end was right outside the house. My stomach twisted into knots. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. What the hell was going on? I checked the locks on the front and back doors, making sure everything was secure. But no matter how many times I told myself it was just a prank, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I called the restaurant where the parents said they'd be, just to make sure it wasn't them trying to reach me for some reason. The mom picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the lively noise of the restaurant in the background. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what was happening, the calls, the breathing. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "We'll head home soon, just in case. But maybe call the police too, just to be safe." Her calm voice helped, but not much. I hung up, feeling more unsettled than before. And that's when the phone rang again. I stared at the ringing phone, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't want to answer it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to pick up, but my hand moved on its own, trembling as I reached for the receiver. Maybe it was the parents calling back. Maybe they'd forgotten to mention something. Maybe it was anything other than what I was afraid of. I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" Silence. but only for a moment. And then, the voice. It was low, almost a growl, distorted like the person was speaking through gritted teeth. Or maybe they weren't quite human. "I'm watching you." The words were slow, deliberate, dripping with something that felt like a smile. My blood ran cold. I slammed the phone down, my whole body shaking now. I locked the door to the living room, even though I knew that wouldn't really help. Whoever it was, they knew where I was. They were close. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but before I could dial, the landline rang again. I jumped, dropping my cell on the couch. The sound of the house phone was deafening in the sudden silence, echoing off the walls like it was inside my head. I didn't answer this time. I just stood there, staring at it, my heart racing. It rang over and over, the sound stretching out into something unbearable. Finally, it stopped. The silence felt even worse. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my skin clammy with sweat. I picked up my cell phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, her voice calm and professional, but I could barely get the words out. "Someone's calling the house," I whispered. "They said they're watching me. I'm here with 2 kids. I think someone's outside." She stayed on the line with me, her voice steady, asking questions, trying to keep me calm. She said officers were on the way. I felt a little relief knowing that help was coming, but it wasn't enough to drown out the terror creeping up my spine. I thanked her and hung up, trying to figure out what to do next. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Even though the police said the intruder was gone, even though they assured me it was probably a one-time thing, just some sick freak playing a game, I couldn't convince myself that it was over. The house felt different. Every shadow stretched a little too long. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye. A shadow that would disappear the second I turned my head. A flicker of movement in the reflection of a window that would vanish when I looked directly at it. I told myself it was just the trauma, just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't over. I tried to move on with my life, but the fear followed me everywhere. Even when I was in my own home, in broad daylight, I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was just out of sight, watching, waiting. I started getting these weird, anonymous texts from numbers I didn't recognize. At first, they were harmless, just random, meaningless messages. But then, they got more personal. "Do you miss me?" one text read. "I liked the way you sounded when you were scared," said another. I changed my number, but the texts kept coming. Somehow, they always found me. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that it wasn't connected to that night, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. That same presence from the house was still with me, still playing the game. It wasn't just the texts. Strange things started happening around me. I'd come home to find my front door slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it. I'd hear the faint sound of a phone ringing in the distance, even when there was no phone nearby. Once, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper when I left work. It was written in the same messy, uneven handwriting as the note the police found near the upstairs phone that night. It just said, "I see you." I showed the note to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. There was no evidence, no fingerprints, nothing to trace. They told me it was probably just a prank, but I could see the look in the officer's eyes. He was scared too. Scared because he knew how real this was, and how helpless we both were to stop it. I started losing sleep. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, straining to hear any sound over the pounding of my own heartbeat. And when I did manage to fall asleep, the nightmares came. I'd dream of the house, of the phone ringing over and over, of that low, raspy breathing echoing through the empty rooms. But the worst dreams were the ones where I'd wake up and find myself back in that bedroom, hiding with the girls, listening to the footsteps outside the door. except in the dreams, the door always opened. It got so bad that I eventually moved out of my apartment and into a different city, hoping that putting distance between myself and that night would help. For a while it did. Things were quiet. I started to feel normal again, like maybe I'd finally escaped whatever thing had attached itself to me. But then, one night, about a year after the babysitting incident, I came home from work to find a package waiting on my doorstep. There was no return address, no name, nothing. Just my name scrawled across the front in that same messy handwriting. My hands were shaking as I brought it inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I debated calling the police, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the package carefully, my breath hitching as I pulled out what was inside. It was a burner phone, just a cheap, disposable phone, but it was already powered on, and the second I pulled it out of the box, it started ringing. I froze, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I didn't want to answer it. I knew I shouldn't answer it, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand moved on its own, lifting the phone to my ear. At first, there was nothing but silence, and then the breathing started. That same slow, raspy breathing I'd heard that night, deep and heavy, like whoever it was had been waiting a long time to call me again. I felt my knees go weak, my whole body trembling. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I was rooted in place. And then, the voice spoke. Just 3 words, whispered so softly, I almost didn't hear them. I'm still here. I dropped the phone, my vision swimming, my pulse roaring in my ears. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the phone had stopped ringing. There was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no leads, nothing. It was like he was a ghost, always one step ahead, always watching. It's been years now, and I've moved 3 times since that night. But no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, the fear follows me. Every time I hear a phone ring, my heart skips a beat. Every time I get a text from an unknown number, I feel that cold knot of dread tighten in my chest. I know he's still out there. Story number 3. I'd been babysitting for years, but there was something about this particular job that felt different from the moment I stepped through the door. The family had just moved into an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods and wide open fields that stretched out as far as the eye could see. The parents were polite, but there was a nervous edge to them, like they were in a hurry to get out of the house. The mom mentioned something offhand about their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, having an active imagination, especially at night, and that if she said anything strange, I shouldn't be too concerned. I laughed it off, figuring it was just typical kid stuff, like monsters under the bed or shadows in the closet. But as the door closed behind them and the house settled into an uncomfortable silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something I wasn't ready for. The house was old, really old, and every floorboard creaked under my feet. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like a whisper. Lily was sweet, but quiet, her big eyes watching me with a seriousness that felt too heavy for a kid her age. After dinner, we played a board game in the living room, and as the sun began to set, the house seemed to grow darker faster than it should have, the shadows stretching long and deep, clinging to the corners of the room like they belonged there. I turned on every light I could, but it didn't help much. The house felt alive, like it was breathing around us. It was around 8 p.m. when things started to get weird. Lily and I were watching a cartoon when she suddenly went completely still, her eyes fixed on something behind me. "What is it, Lily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, but my heart was already pounding in my chest. She didn't say anything at first, just pointed a small, trembling finger toward the big bay window that faced the backyard. "Can you tell the man outside to go away?" she whispered, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. My stomach dropped. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. At first, I didn't see anything. The yard was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the porch light. The trees at the edge of the property swayed gently in the breeze, their branches scratching against each other like claws. But then I saw it. A face. Pale, expressionless, barely visible in the shadows, but unmistakably there. It was pressed up against the window, just staring at us. The eyes were wide, too wide, and the mouth was stretched into this unnatural grin, like it was trying to mimic a smile, but didn't quite know how. I froze, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? A neighbor messing around? But we were in the middle of nowhere. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. I pulled Lily close, trying not to let her see how scared I was. "It's okay," I whispered. "Let's go upstairs, okay?" She nodded, her little hand gripping mine tightly. I locked the front and back doors before heading upstairs, my heart pounding with every creak of the old wooden steps. We went into her bedroom, and I locked the door behind us. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. I tried again and again, but the call wouldn't go through. That's when I realized I hadn't heard the car leave when the parents left earlier. I didn't remember hearing the engine, didn't see headlights disappearing down the driveway. My stomach twisted into knots. Had they even left at all? I tried to shake the thought from my mind, focusing on keeping Lily calm. I pulled a dresser in front of the door, barricading us in, and whispered, "It's just a game, okay? We're going to hide in here until someone comes home." Lily nodded again, but her eyes were fixed on the window. "He doesn't like it when we hide," she whispered. I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at the window, her eyes wide with fear. I turned slowly, my skin prickling with cold. The window was on the second floor, too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. But there, pressed against the glass, was the same face. Closer now, smiling wider. Impossible. I grabbed Lily and pulled her into the closet, shutting the door behind us, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, feel the adrenaline surging through my veins. The house was dead silent, except for the faint sound of tapping on the window. Slow, deliberate, like whoever or whatever it was wanted us to know it was still there. I don't know how long we stayed in that closet, but every second felt like an eternity. I kept my hand over Lily's mouth to keep her quiet, even though I could feel her tiny body shaking against mine. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the tapping stopped. The house went completely silent. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had left. Maybe we were safe. But then I heard it. The sound of the bedroom door creaking open. But I had locked it. I had barricaded it. The footsteps were slow, heavy, moving toward the closet. I could hear the floorboards groaning under the weight. I held my breath, praying, begging that whoever it was wouldn't find us. But then, the footsteps stopped, right outside the closet door. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face, waiting for the door to burst open, for the nightmare to become real. But nothing happened, just silence. And then, after what felt like hours, the sound of footsteps retreating, moving away from the closet, out of the room. I waited, listening, until I was sure the house was silent again. Then, slowly, I opened the closet door. The room was empty. The window was closed. But the bedroom door, it was wide open. I grabbed Lily and ran downstairs, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except getting out of that house. I flung the front door open and ran into the yard, screaming for help. That's when I saw the headlights coming down the driveway, the parents' car. They pulled up, confused and terrified, as I told them what happened. The father grabbed a baseball bat from the car and ran inside while the mother called the police. When the officers arrived and searched the house, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints outside the window, No evidence that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I saw. I knew. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, one of the officers called me over. He was holding something in his hand, a small, old-fashioned photograph. It was faded and yellowed, but the face in the photo was unmistakable. It was the same face I'd seen in the window. The officer said they found it tucked under Lily's pillow. The parents were horrified. They had no idea where the photo had come from. But here's the part that still haunts me. A few days later, I did some digging, desperate to find an explanation. I found out that decades ago, the house had belonged to a man who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. They never found his body, but people in town said his spirit still lingered, watching, waiting for someone to move into the house so he could come back. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know. All I know is that face, that smile, will stay with me for the rest of my life. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the window, a face, a smile, and I know he's still there,